I'm Brian Flanagan. I'm coming from the true western part of the state. Just represent the Panhandle a little, yeah. I'm a graduate of Oklahoma Panhandle State, where I did my undergrad. I got my hat, trying to represent a little bit, but no offense, Langston Cameron, other universities, but yeah, just trying to represent. I've almost been disowned by my parents because they're Oklahoma State grads, and I do have a degree from A&M, and, oh, hey, that, and, sorry, Tech. Oh, hey! But, yeah, my cowboy relatives have pretty much disowned me, so that's why I'm here today. So maybe someday I can return home. But yeah, so it gives a little bit of a history about me. I assume you're in this room because you're interested in soil health and your soils. I'm assuming that would be a good guess. I thought I'd just share briefly why I'm interested in soils, and maybe your story's similar, maybe it's not, but I want you to also reflect on why are you interested in soils as we go through this day and through this track. So I'm from the Oklahoma Panhandle. My parents grew up in Texoma, Oklahoma. I traveled around a little bit because my parents were, I was an Army kid, Army brat, and then my dad and mom were missionaries in Haiti, so I traveled around a little bit more. But my parents grew up in Texoma. They drugged me back to Texoma, where I finished high school, went to Oklahoma Panhandle State University, traveled the world a little more, and now I'm back in Texoma for the time being. So this is Texoma. That's the Lutheran Church. I live about a block from the Lutheran Church. Now this was in the 1930s, not alive then, but in the 1930s, this was the time of the Dust Bowl coming through. So my grandmother, who's 98, about to turn 99 in a few weeks, has always shared a lot of stories about growing up in the Oklahoma Panhandle in Oklahoma, and then made a move to Arkansas for a brief period to try to survive this period of time with her 11 siblings. And so that had a big impact on understanding soil and the importance of soil to our family, who has a farm and ranch in the area. While at Oklahoma Panhandle State, I had a chance to travel to Honduras after Hurricane Mitch in '98, so I'm kind of dating myself a little bit there. And this picture on the other side here is what they call the cat scratches of after the hurricane, where you see the soil erosion that happened after many hours and days of just rain following in Honduras, because of Hurricane Mitch setting over Nicaragua and Honduras, and just the devastation it did to farmers in those communities. I later worked in Haiti, where I also grew up as a missionary kid for about 10 years. So these experiences, I've seen the importance of healthy soil for a farmer, but I've also seen the impacts of not having healthy soil. So that's why it kind of drew me to this topic and wanting to learn more. Had the opportunity to study for my master's at Cornell, where we talked a lot about soil health, and we'll have some resources. This book right here, recommend it. Josh has brought copies free. Make sure you make it down to the end of the hall and grab your free copy before others do. And is that on the jump drive too?
It should be on the jump drive also.
So that's a great book. One of the professors at Cornell that I had a privilege to get to know did a lot of work on that book, is one of the authors, and so great resource for you all, and so it's free for you all today, so I want to make sure you know that. But I wish I could say everything was better. We figured out the soil health issues in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Wish we would have solved the issues of soil health in Haiti and Honduras. No, the work continues, and I'm sure it probably continues on your own farm in your own situations. This is Texoma. Can't really say it. Diane Murphy, former teacher of mine, took this picture from her yard. That's actually our grain elevators. On a clear day, you spot them really well. On December, I think it was the 2nd of 2022, this is what it looked like in Texoma, Oklahoma. It's just dust coming through. So we had big winds, just picked up the dust and brought it on. So this was back probably in April of 34 or something, with the dust rolling in, and this was in December of this last year, so less than a year ago. We went through a really hard 3 years, maybe some probably say 4, of drought in our area. So this is outside of Texoma. This is near some land that where my uncle farms and ranches. So you can just see this was taken in April of this year. We've now received some rains. A lot of these soils that were really poor, now you've got these wild sunflowers all over the place. If people are able to keep some soil matter, keep some grass going, keep it going, not overgrazing, then the grass has really come back. But a lot of that area that was barren, overgrazed areas, just weeds have been coming up. So this is kind of where I'm coming from. Now I feel like I'm in paradise right now, driving from Oklahoma Panhandle yesterday to here and just see how green it gets. But hopefully we have some things that are relevant as we talk about it. So as we look at soil degradation, one of my professors always was clear to say it's a spiral, it's a system. You get in this trap and it kind of continues and continues. So we'll walk through this. So here we have some of the reasons it starts. We got intensive tillage. So that's, think about the Dust Bowl era, plow up all the grasslands. You got soil erosion. You have insufficient added residues. And then that leads to you losing your soil organic matter. And that starts to decrease. As you start losing that soil organic matter in that soil, then you start seeing your aggregates break down. So that's we'll probably talk a little bit more about that later, but that's your kind of your clumps of soil, your kind of what holds things together. It gives it the structure, gives your soil the structure, those aggregates. Then once that starts to break down and you lose that structure in your soil, your surface then becomes compacted, and then you have a crust form. Then, especially in the Oklahoma Panhandle, in Haiti, it might be rainfall and hillsides, but then you start having erosion by wind and water that occur. Leads to more soil organic matter is lost. Then you have less water storage, less diversity of soil organisms. We're going to talk a lot about soil organisms later. And then you have fewer nutrients for your plants. Then here in our situation, what will often happen, your crop yields are reduced. Now, if you're living in the 30s in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and maybe even parts here and in Kansas and whatnot, it's going to lead to hunger and malnutrition results. In many parts of the country where all three of us have worked, that is a real reality that we see. Maybe here it's not as big, maybe it's not going to lead to hunger and malnutrition, but it's going to make it a little harder to get to the food to the market and to the people that need it, right? So that's some of I'm giving you the hard news first, okay? So bear with me on that. As we think about proposed solutions, I don't know. I mean, I've already had conversations with people with some great ideas already this morning about some great solutions that they're working on their own land. Has a wide variety of names, all different types. You got people talking about agroecology. We have the Brown Revolution, so focusing in on the soil health. We got regenerative agriculture. We have carbon farming. I like to integrate trees. Can't do it in the Oklahoma Panhandle as much as I'd like, but I really like agroforestry. So how do we integrate trees into it and adding organic matter back through trees? And so carbon farming. Holistic management, so having systems of grazing. I'll talk about a really cool guy in the Panhandle doing holistic management. And then just the general term, conservation agriculture. So all probably terms you have heard at different parts of your journey. And if you haven't, you're probably going to continue to hear more. If you read the book, you're going to hear more about it. And we'll try to give you some resources learning about all these different options, all these different ways people are trying to address it around the world. Now, they have their own battles, too. Let's be clear. Each one has their own version of it. Some are doing it organic. Some are doing it with GMOs. So there's different battles happening within themselves amongst farmers, but also often amongst academics. So I think we've all experienced that. But what do the following all have in common, do you think? Heard somebody say soil. Might have been Josh.
Restoration of the soil.
Yeah. Yeah, I said soil health, but I love restoration of soil. So they all kind of have that as a basis. They may be getting it different ways, attempting it different ways, but it comes down to soil health. So we're going to talk about soil health today. And it might fit into your system of how you're doing it or how you want to do it. So soil health is the capacity of the soil to function, cycle nutrients, to sustain plant and animal productivity, and to maintain or improve water quality. So this is from the NRCS Oklahoma Soil Health Card, so we'll talk a little more about that. So soil functions. Serves as a natural medium for the growth of plants. Soil regulates and purifies water. It releases, filters, and buffers chemical compounds. Got to keep an eye on the time. Serves as a habitat for soil organisms, and provides structural support for things like building and construction also. So those are some of the functions in soil. So soil's capacity to function equals soil health. So you might have good soil health, you may be doing wonderful in all these things, or your soil health may be slightly poor. So we're going to look a little bit start with the characteristics of a healthy soil. So one of the things that you want with a good, healthy soil is good tilth. So that's your seed bed. That's what you're going to plant in. You want to have good soil where you have this good combination of the particle size is right for you to put your seed in. You want to have the moisture content that you need. You want to have good water infiltration occurring on your soil. And in some cases where you have too much water, you need to be able to have it drain. You also want to have sufficient nutrients, but not too much of a good thing. So you need to also limit that. Make sure it's not too much. You want to have soil that has sufficient rooting depth. So compacted soils, the roots can't grow. We'll see some pictures of that in a little while, but you want to have some good rooting depth. Good water storage and drainage, kind of talked about that already. Free of chemicals that might harm plants. Worked with some people working in urban areas, and that was in community gardens in Florida and other places, and so that was a huge issue, was just getting good, clean soil that didn't have contamination in it. Low population of plant disease and parasitic organisms, but a high population of beneficials organisms, and I think Josh will really hit on the organic on the biology side. You want some low weed pressure and resistance to being degraded. But you also want that resilience where it quickly recovers from adverse events. So like I gave the example in Oklahoma Panhandle, we went through this major drought. You could really, driving around, you can see the difference. You can see the farmers that have resilient soils and who don't. Some of them are coming back, grasses are coming back, probably grasses they haven't seen in a long time coming back, doing well. And then you also see other soils where it's just the weeds have completely taken over and not a sign of grass. So there's examples of that. So you need to have that, you want to have that resiliency built in. As we think about poor soil health, things you might see, general signs are going to be rapid onset of stress or stunted growth. You're going to have a hard soil at the planting time, plowing up cloddy soil, making it where you have a poor seed bed. So you plow it up and you don't really get a good aggregates, and so you're not getting good seed to soil contact so that it takes off. So that's some of the things you find with these cloddy soils. Of course, signs of runoff and erosion, like we saw in some of the pictures already. Poor growth of plants is also a sign that you'll often see with poor soils. Soil crusting, so getting that layer at the top where you have your soil is not aggregated, so it starts to crust a little bit, and so that causes issues for you with when you're planting and such. And then high disease pressure is another sign of poor soils. And then, of course, one that we're all really interested in and concerned about is decreased yields from poor soils. So you've probably all seen examples of that. I'm sure it's all your neighbors, none of you, but seeing issues of some of these things happening on their farms. All right, so soil health. Many integrated physical, biological, and chemical properties determine the health of the soil. So let me see if my pointer works. Okay, so you're looking at, when we're going to talk about the biological processes, the chemical ones, the physical, and then in that sweet spot right there is a good soil health, where it's all meeting together. I think we're often, and I can say this probably all around the world, we're pretty guilty of sitting here in the chemical a lot of times, is my opinion. We're relying on fertilizer to get us through. We've got poor soils, we'll give it fertilizer. I talk to many, many farmers all around the world, and often that's our first solution. But there's other factors that we could be thinking about, this biological, physical components that we need to be addressing too, along with, I believe, the chemical. So having to address that. So processes in soil health. So I want you to, as we go through this, think that you're a root. Now I say this because I had a professor that always told us this. Think like a root when we're thinking about this. So if you're a root and you're thinking about soil health, you want the support of a microbial community. You want beneficials, producing plant growth, promoting compounds. You want that to be occurring in yours. And so that's a biological component. Pest suppression, low pest populations, that's biological. Organic matter decomposition occurring, maybe nitrogen mineralization, all occurring. Immobilization of toxins, all these things. That's processes that you want in your soil health, and that if you're a root, that you want to be occurring, okay? In the chemical, we're looking at nutrient storage and release. We're looking at soil-water reactions. We're looking at energy storage, so carbon storage, issues of salinity, toxicity prevention, all that we're thinking about in the chemical component. And then for physical, the root wants good till, so we talked about that, having a good soil that has good moisture, has good aggregates, able to grow in, dig down into. You want some aeration occurring. You want physical support for the plant. You want to be, as a plant, as a root, you want to be able to go in the ground and be able to hold the plant up. Soil water storage and movement is another key component that you need to be occurring. Needs to be occurring. Resistance to soil erosion. We talked about physical root proliferation and organism movement needs to be occurring in that physical area. So we got your biological, your chemical, and your physical components. That brings it all together for a good, healthy soil. Okay, that needs to be occurring. But it's important to realize that these all interact. So as I mentioned, sometimes we've been guilty of maybe just focusing on the chemical aspect. But this is a good example of how they all are interrelated and impact each other. So here we have a hard soil. So that's a physical processes. That's a physical issue. And we have a low pH chemical. That's going to reduce rooting on your plants. Okay? So you can see how not addressing your hard soil, not addressing your low pH, then leads to a biological issue of rooting. Okay? So maybe you're picking up what I'm doing here with my colors. I had my fifth grader help me with this. Prolific rooting decreases compaction. So biological, so that rooting again shows up, and then that compaction shows up in the physical. Compacted soil suppresses beneficial biological processes. So kind of, man, I'm just realizing, well, I guess prolific. I was thinking I'm kind of a negative person today, but I do have a positive one on the second one. Compaction increases root diseases, denitrification losses, and root growth occurs. Poor drainage reduces rooting and aerobic biological processes. So organic matter decomposition increases aggregation and nutrient availability. So having that organic matter in the soil breaking down is going to help both your physical and your nutrient availability. Remember that one. That's a really important one, I think, when we're talking about soil health, about that organic matter. We were actually just talking, I'm sorry, what is Catherine, you brought it up, just ways of getting material onto your, yeah, you're trying to get things on your land, your 5 acres, trying to figure out what to get in there to build that soil. So right away you're trying to address that on your property. High sodium content reduces aggregate stability, drainage, aeration, and rooting. And then finally, organic matter storage increases nutrient and water retention. So this just gives you some examples of how they interact with each other. So there's probably a long list you could create as you keep going and thinking about it, but it's just the understanding what I hope today and in my session you come away with is that need for the biological, the need for the chemical, and the need for the physical, and how we combine those together and how they interact with each other. So principles to manage soil for health. Maximize the presence of living roots. So I think about those plains of Oklahoma and get into Kansas and all that grassland, and we were blessed to have soils like that with all that grass roots in the soil breaking down. And then we came and we plowed it up well and planted our fields, and we succeeded for a long time off of that. And that was because, we had those roots in there, and that was organic matter in the soil for a long time. But we need to keep that. We need to keep those living roots going. Minimize disturbance. So how do we get in there and try to do as little harm as possible, and try not to disturb the soil as much as possible? So hopefully we can talk some more about options for that. But you need to think, how can I minimize the disturbance of the soil as I'm going into my farm? So some people are doing no-till, and we'll talk about some are doing, in upstate New York where I was for a while, a lot of people were trying to make their way to no-till, but having to use other systems to get themselves there. So it's a slow process. So be patient, give yourself time as you work towards those things. That's also a key. Maximize soil cover. So I've worked in different countries and know a lot of people doing conservation agriculture throughout South Africa, East Africa. And one of the things I remember hearing, and maybe they say this in the US, but I heard it in Africa first, was, you want to have a blanket on your soil. You want to have that blanket, that covering. So whether it's organic matter as mulch or whatnot, or if it's using cover crops, try to cover that soil as much as possible. Try to not make it open. So many farmers, organic farmer too, you're having to plow the fields, manage the weeds. That's a daily grind. It's hard. You have to find ways to manage those things, and so often we use the plow to do that. But if we can find ways to try to maximize soil cover, you'll definitely see some benefits on your soil health over time. And I've seen it in some pretty drastic situations where it's improved for farmers around the world. Maximize biodiversity. So that's your soil, that's your livestock in the ground, in the soil. It's your plant diversity. Just try to think, how can I diversify my farm? Maybe it's through rotations. Maybe it's, I'm a big, like I said, agroforestry guy. how you integrate trees, create biodiversity that way. How do you maximize biodiversity on your farm? Be thinking about ways that you can do that. All right, so some good practices to keep in mind as you're thinking about these things, these topics. Reduce frequency and intensity of tillage operations. Try to limit that compaction that can occur with heavy equipment. So some ways people do is this no-till. What was really popular in upstate New York, the professors I worked with, and the extension workers, they really promoted, as people were transitioning, doing strip till. And so there's many different ways that you can do that. But the main focus, and it's going to vary for each one of you in your own situation, but what you're trying to think about is how to disturb the soil as little as possible. So there's going to be disturbance that happens. That's just the life of farming. But how can you do it as little as possible in your situation, in your own personal farm, personal land? Kind of touched on it already, increase organic matter inputs. So you can do that through cover crops. We were talking when I first arrived about manure, compost, plant residues. I've heard a few people talking a lot about worm casts and growing worms. I don't know if we're going to cover that much, but yeah, I've heard several people in just overhearing conversations. I like to tell my kids we have a worm bin. And so I told my daughter, she's now 7, but when we got them, she was 4. And we're not allowed to have a pet in the house we're in. And it's a sad thing for my kids. So I said, the worms are our pets. So, of course, what does she do? Preschool. Shows up. Anyone have pets? Yeah, I do. What's your pet, Carrie? Worms. And so it happened that her teacher was also the pastor's wife of the church we attend, and she's like, "You're not going to believe what your daughter just came and told us." And somebody said, "Do you think it's true?" And she's like, "Yeah, knowing Brian, yes, it's true." So yes, we have worms at our house. That's our pet. But yeah, so we have bins. So they're mostly outside because of my wife. But I don't want to drag on too long on this topic, but what cracked me up the most, so my grandmother, lady lived through the Dust Bowl, has seen so many things, had children pass away, everything you think. And one day she comes up and I was like, "Hey, Grandma, have you seen the worms before?" And I, went and pulled them out and pulled out a handful. She freaked out. And she was like, "I do not like worms." And so I was like, okay, I did not expect that from my rough and tumble grandmother, but found her one weakness was worms. So I kind of joke, I'd give her some, but my mom's like, "Do not do that to your 98-year-old grandmother." So yeah, all to say, yes, worms. Having worms and using the castings, a great opportunity. Vegetative plant cover all year, so just finding ways if there's possibilities. It's not always possible for every farmer in their situation, but no bare soil, thinking about when are you tilling, try to do as minimal damage as possible, thinking about winter cover crops, growing those, then killing them off as you then come in and plant in the residues, so that's a common practice around the world. Thinking about some of those things. So now each person's situation is going to be different. So I wish I could come here and just give you the cookbook and you just follow the recipe. But I think everyone's got their own situation. So these are kind of giving you some of the practices that you can think about on your own farm as you think through some of this soil health. Reduce compaction, field traffic. Kind of touched on that already. It's a key one. Crop rotation. And perennials when possible. So if you're dealing with a lot of eroded soil, a lot of places, hillsides, whatnot, if you can get the cover crop that's more of a perennial to hold that soil in place so you're not having to disturb it very often, that would be a great place where you're thinking about perennials and how to use perennials in your system. Manage pests and nutrients efficiently. So you want to be able to test and monitor, apply only when needed, at the right time, and place for optimal effects. So have many of you thought of, have many, like IPM, integrated pest management, is that a topic you've kind of touched on in your life? So it's just understanding your local pest situation, monitoring it, and knowing when the threshold, so when you hit a certain point that the damage is starting to economically impact you, then you're gonna hit it kind of before that point, so you kill off the pests at that point. So you're not just spraying like, oh, it's Tuesday, oh, I spray on Tuesday, yes, let's go spray. But it's actually monitoring, looking at what's going on in your field, and trying to make some of those decisions based on learning about the environment. And so that's
bugs and the bad bugs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have to be careful with it. Yeah, exactly. So you got to think about how you're doing it using the approach. So manage pests and nutrients efficiency. I mean, even just thinking about when you spray, time of day, and how do you, if you're actually spraying chemicals, like not to impact the bees that are out in your fields, things like that. So some things we've, if we're like, oh yeah, maybe that's common sense, but if you hadn't thought about it before, it wasn't common sense, so you gotta think about it. Okay, so by improving soil health, you increase plant vigor and yield. You reduce risk of yield loss, stress, so things like drought, pests, pressure. You reduce input costs, so you're going to do less tillage, less cost for that, hopefully less fertilizer over time, and less pesticide use over time. So this can have a large influence on profitability over time as you integrate some of these practices. So that's kind of the idea. So both good environmental reasons, but I know a lot of us care about our money. I know I do. So even the economics of it really do matter. Okay, so we're coming down. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'll try to wrap this up in a little bit. But soil health testing, and give you time for questions if you have, but soil health testing. So some reasons you want to think about testing your soil and thinking about soil health. Understand the constraints beyond nutrients. So we kind of talked about that already, but it's important that you just not like, oh, okay, I need some nitrogen, so we're going to do that. But are there other constraints you want to address, and how do you do that? And by doing a soil health test, you can understand your various constraints and not just the nutrient ones. You can target your management practices to alleviate those constraints by having a soil health test. Measure soil improvement or degradation from management. So, hey, I've been trying this for a while. Wonder if it works or not. Am I seeing improvements? Doing a test is probably a good idea to see if you're wasting your time or not, or if you need to adjust things. So, really important reason. Facilitate applied research, so compare management practice to develop a farm field specific management program. So you're a researcher yourself on your own farm. You're getting these results. You're thinking, oh, okay, it worked here. Maybe if I try it over here this way, and just do some applied research in your own situation. Enable valuation of farmland. So there's a lot of stories. I was listening to a story recently about some farmers in South Dakota who started doing a lot of no-till in some of those areas, and an organization that's really come alongside them, helping them go to no-till. And one of the impacts, they're making the claim, that by doing no-till, they've actually seen the value of their land go like 10 times because they're so much more profitable on their fields. They're saying, the yields that they're getting and all the benefits from that. So they're actually seeing, and of course, land value goes up anyway, but they, I think, have a good case for some of this no-till, improving the value of the land. And improve awareness of soil health. Once again, I don't know, I think with you all, maybe it's not as big of a deal. I think you're all in this room for the reasons of thinking more holistically about how you manage your soil, but it's not just plant nutrients that we have to consider. We have to consider the whole picture. I highly recommend downloading this. It's their comprehensive assessment of soil health. It's the Cornell Soil Health Test. So if you just Google Cornell Soil Health Test, it'll take you to this 3rd edition. The reason I recommend it, it's not that it's made for the Northeast. The soil test, the way it's been researched, is really focused on that. But they really do a good job of explaining the processes, explaining the different things, the physical, the biological, and the chemical components they're looking at. So that's a really good resource for you all. And we maybe have a little bit of time to go over this. We may go over it a little quick, but we're going to look at the Oklahoma NRCS Soil Health Card. Josh will help. Oh, I have some here too. Okay.
I'll just go down and pass them out.
So everybody gets one. So this is a tool for you to think about as you look at your own land and think about it. So it's going to touch on different aspects of that chemical, that biological, and the physical components of your land to think about. And then you score it. You have these indicators, and we'll walk through the indicators in just a second. But then you score it 1 to 10. So 10 being low, and 1 being low. I'm not sure what I said there. 1 being low and 10 being preferred. So is how you score this, and so you walk through that on your land. So the assessment calendar. I'm not sure if the one you have has the assessment calendar on, but I'm sure this is a document you can find online. But your assessment calendar, when you're actually going to test for each one of those. So how to use the Oklahoma NRCS Soil Health Card. You know, the one I showed you from Cornell, there's a lot more contraptions, more taking it into the soil lab, sending it off to the extension lab at Cornell. But this one is a really handy one that you can do almost everything right there in the field. So you just need your shovel, probably need your paper, would be a good idea too. But you're going to take soil samples to a depth of 10 to 12 inches from different areas on the field. And then on the scorecard, you're going to rate each indicator, as I mentioned, by just placing an X in the box by the corresponding number. So you rate the first 4 indicators for the sample taken. And so you can do that from the sample you have, soil sample you take. Then rate the next 5 from observations around the site. And then you will rate the soil pH from a soil test analysis. So send that off. I think we're going to have maybe a little bit of conversation about the soil pH of soils and different little tools that you can even find in your own store. Maybe if you get that Tractor Supply gift card. There you go. Yeah, good luck, guys. Cheering for you. And then also there's a spot for other notes. So such as it's important to know cropping and tillage systems that have been done on it, inputs and other observations can be obtained. Okay. Let me always go a little longer than I think I'm going to, but you want to talk soil structure and aggregate stability is one that you're going to test for. So you take that soil sample, it gets dipped in water in the sieve, and if you do this SLAC test, 25 to 100% of the soil remains on a sieve after 5 dipping cycles. That's a good rating. Is that going to happen for you? Or nothing? Well, that may be more on the low rating. You're getting there though. You're on a scale, so you can always improve, right? So that's the first one. Organic matter. So they're looking at that top part there, looking at the decomposition, dark colored surface, having some roots in that, showing you got some organic matter in that soil organic matter. So medium rating has some residue, maybe a light brown or medium colored surface, and then you got your low rating and your beach there. So no roots or residue, light colored surface. So that's a way to visually look at your organic matter. Now the Cornell one, they would actually take that soil and they'd put it in an oven at a really hot temperature. They'd weigh it first, put it in there, burn all the organic matter off, weigh it again, and then they can come up with some math, figure out your percent of organic matter doing that. So that's one of the ways that they would do it. But this is a little simpler. You don't have to put soil in your oven and try to get it up to like 500 and some degrees or whatever it is. Compaction, loose soil, no root restrictions. So mostly those roots are growing vertical plant growth. Medium, you got a firm soil, and you got some restricted roots in that. I don't know if you can see it that well. But then on your low one, low rating, you got hard layers, you got a tight soil, limited root penetration, so they go about 8 inches and then they turn at a 90-degree angle and they don't go any further for you. So that's really compacted soil. Earthworms, so many worms, insects, that's what you're looking for. That's a great way to see if you got the, okay, too far. Water infiltration is another one, so you can measure it. You can use a ring like this and go see, or if you've had a heavy rain, go out and just visually inspect it. I don't know if you'll talk about Gabe Brown. Gabe? No.
Yeah, I'll mention Gabe Brown. Sure.
Yeah, so I heard a story about him. So this is a farmer, I think South Dakota. He bought some land. The USDA went out and tested it when he first bought it. They put some water. They did the soil tests. 30 minutes, the water's still standing there, not seeping in at all. Then several years later, after implementing no-till and many other practices, had a heavy rain, 13 inches of rain in like a 24-hour period, and by the next day he could still drive his tractors out on his field where he had other people getting stuck. So just kind of anecdotal story there. Looking for plant health, just looking for healthy, uniform, vigorous stands, so that's something to keep an eye on. Percent cover of your organic matter, so it's not a really good picture showing up there, but you want greater than 60% cover would be ideal if possible, and then you kind of move your way down. Erosion, so I don't have a good one, so I guess I've not traveled to places I have good pictures of good erosion, no erosion, but here's some examples of poor ones, something you can visibly see and observe the erosion. Salinity, so there are tests you can do for salinity, but also just visibly seeing the stunted growth, the saline spots in the fields might observe that in some regions, so something you can spot with your eye. And then the one we said you need to do the test for, so soil pH, getting it within that range of the crop. So, okay, we got to wrap her up. All right, so here we are, we're good. I just wanted to show this picture of these guys, two really innovative farmers in the Oklahoma Panhandle. So, yeah, so they're great examples of trying to slowly make the process to better their soils and better their soil health. And so it's not an easy process. There's a lot of steps that you go, but just keep making the process. Keep making the steps that you need as the process goes. So, all right, well, I want to thank you all, and hopefully that kind of gives you a general overview as we're going to move forward, and I think at 11:15. So we have a short time for if there are any quick questions, or if you need to take a break, you can also do that. So. So, Josh, biochar, are you going to talk about biochar?
Yeah, I'll talk just a little bit about biochar, the soil food web's approach to that, and then some of the advantages. I know we've got the living soil guy here, and Seth, and he's got biochar and some of his amendments, and so just we can discuss that a little bit. Yeah, in that biology of the soil.
Yeah.
Right after lunch.
Yeah. So I've seen, internationally I've seen some really great examples of biochar being used in low-cost soils.
Well, it's great. Okay. The short but my perspective on it, it's great stuff, but it takes a lot of energy to produce it, and you got to do it just right.
You got to do something with that wood.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, just thank you very much. Can we give a hand to Brian? Okay, so it's break time, 11:15.